Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Ed Miliband appears to be ruled out as the next Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's set instead to be Shabana Mahmood. England versus Argentina is starting to look as tasty off the pitch as it does on it. We delve into Bastani's latest viral foray into right-wing media with the man himself. And finally, the mother of one of our own tells us her incredible first-hand experience of the forced adoption scandal. It's an awful lot to fit into 1 hour, and we are going to fit it into precisely 1 hour today, so I can jump on a line bike and get to the pub to watch England-Argentina before the pub closes their doors. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani this evening.
Michael.
How are we?
I'm struggling.
Why?
3 weeks without the gym. It's tough.
And what's brought that on?
My wife and I have sort of been doing a bit of traveling while we have some changes to the home we live in, because we're having a new bedroom made for our second daughter. Touch wood, God willing, inshallah.
I didn't know it was a daughter.
It's a girl.
Oh,
it's a girl.
When's the due date?
31st of August.
31st of August.
So our terrace house hasn't had a roof for a couple of weeks, and so it's been chaotic. And that, obviously, chaos means heavily pregnant wife, heat wave. I would love to be so irresponsible that I would still be going off and deadlifting, 180 kilos or whatever, but not even I'm that thoughtless.
So I think if they're born on the 31st of August, you get to decide what school year they go into, potentially. And statistically, babies born in September have much stronger life chances than babies born in August. Obviously, this is just on averages. Obviously, babies born in August can be incredibly successful and stuff. But it is one of those remarkable statistical facts where if you start school when you're old for your year as opposed to young for your year, it does sort of give you advantages throughout life, according to the statistics.
I have a friend whose brother was expecting a child, and it was premature, not massively premature, just a couple of days. The due date was the 2nd of September, and then, a few days early, we're going to have to deliver the child by C-section. I can't remember the precise details, but basically, my friend's brother, had worked out that this was going to cost an extra £12,000 in childcare. He said to his wife, just can't you hold on for a few more days? But I think the argument about, well,
it will cost you more in childcare because the older they are for their year, the more you have to spend on childcare because the longer they wait before they go to school.
I can't remember the precise dates, but anyway.
I was the oldest in my year, 4th of September, and look at me now, I'm a YouTuber. So you can see how the statistics don't lie. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. What month were you born, and do you think it's advantaged you or disadvantaged you during your life? Andy Burnham is set to be sworn in as Prime Minister on Monday, potentially with England as World Cup champions, although that latter claim risks being out of date fairly soon, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. Anyway, as we discussed plenty of times on this show, it's still rather unclear exactly what kind of Prime Minister Burnham will be. Is this a man radicalised by a decade outside of Westminster who really wants to shake things up? Or will this just be Keir Starmer with more charisma and a northern accent? Well, on Tuesday, the argument for option 2 got stronger. So the Times reported last night that allies of Burnham were certain Miliband would not become Chancellor next week. Shabana Mahmood already then was being discussed as the front runner. The paper said 3 people around Burnham told them that he's now been persuaded, that Burnham has been persuaded against appointing Miliband to the role. And this is what the Times reported last night. So they said this: Burnham allies are concerned that Miliband, the Net Zero and Energy Secretary, is a divisive figure who carries significant baggage after his unsuccessful run for number 10 in 2015. They argued that he would not pass the sniff test with the markets, a claim rejected by friends of Miliband. They are also concerned about Miliband's opposition to issuing new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea, a subject on which there is a clear divide. They also wrote, one ally of Burnham said that the tide has turned against Ed, while another said that it looks like the right outcome has been reached, and a third said Ed would have been a lightning rod for criticism. He is out of the running. There was some reporting today that actually there was still a battle going on. So Bloomberg this morning said Burnham still hadn't made his mind up, and there were lots of people within the team arguing for different things. However, the FT has now come out reporting that Shabana Mahmood is set to be the next Chancellor. And this is from their report. One person briefed on the plan said Shabana is nailed down as Chancellor. That's definitely happening. Another said Mahmood would go to the Treasury, while the original frontrunner for the role of Chancellor. Ed Miliband was likely to become Foreign Secretary. One ally of Burnham said of Mahmood's possible appointment, "I wouldn't steer you away from that." Aaron, Ed Miliband, out. Well, I suppose Foreign Secretary is still in a way a promotion, but he wanted the job of Chancellor. Shabana Mahmood in. What do you make of it?
I make a lot of it. Here, become the Foreign Secretary of a nuclear power, G7 economy, as a little treat. Is this a sensible way to run a country? You don't get this job, therefore I'm going to give you this one. You're going to become the Chancellor to appease this faction of the Labour Party. Andy Burnham has just been given the leadership of the Labour Party unopposed. There is not a Labour politician anywhere near as popular as he is with the general public. He doesn't need to listen to any of these people. The problem is, he's a people pleaser. And of course, we know what the composition of the Labour Party in Parliament looks like. It in no way reflects the Labour membership or indeed the country at large. In many ways, it's very different. And Michael, 3 people briefing a newspaper about the next Chancellor just tells me that Labour hasn't changed. They haven't learned their lesson. They are addicted to picking up the phone, going on WhatsApp and telling their good friends at the Sunday Times, the Times, the FT, Bloomberg, no, just to feel important. You can't have a successful political project and operate like this. You can't do it. Now, of course, every project has some people like that. New Labour had Peter Mandelson. But it seems to me that in the Labour Party right now, and what we've seen over the last 2 years with Keir Starmer, is there are just dozens of these little rats doing this constantly. You can't do that because, at some point, they're going to be at loggerheads with Burnham. That's just going to happen. People agree and disagree all the time. We disagree even about things. You can't operate like this, just, impulsively, compulsively contact the mainstream media. So that's the first takeaway. The second one is Shabana Mahmood entered Parliament aged 29. She studied law. She was a barrister. Tell me what her qualifications are to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, I'm not a big credentials person. I'm really not. I don't think you even need to go to university to become a Chancellor or a Prime Minister for that matter, okay? My political hero, Nye Bevan, or one of them, he was a colliery worker. Ernest Bevin was a truck driver, right? He ended up being the Secretary of State for Defense. He helped develop for this country an atomic weapon. Huge giants of 20th century Labour politics. So I'm not suggesting for one moment, well, she doesn't hold the credentials to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. How is she qualified? You tell me.
So she would say that she was for 2 years in the shadow Treasury team between 2013 and 2015.
Great.
But the decision seems to be, I take you, she's a trained lawyer. In China, she'd be an engineer, not a lawyer. But I suppose the argument here, so you've sort of said this is Andy Burnham getting pushed around by the people around him. Also it's potentially just that he's not that left-wing. He doesn't really share Ed Miliband's politics in particular.
Hold on, but I'm not making an argument for Ed Miliband here. I'm saying, why is it Shabana Mahmood? I'm not saying it has to be Ed, because I see look, I don't agree with all the arguments against Ed Miliband, but they're coherent arguments, and I think probably many people agree with them. But why is it Shabana Mahmood? Shabana Mahmood's done, by Andy Burnham's own statements in the past, a good job as Home Secretary. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to win back reform voters, the one person they like in the cabinet is Shabana Mahmood as Home Secretary. So this is about appeasing a certain faction within the party. It makes no sense to me. This is just such dead-end politics. It just says, I've got my political project.
Yeah, it does. I agree with you, basically. I think Ed Miliband should be Chancellor. Obviously, there was a campaign against him from the Labour right, but also the trade unions, which I think was very unfortunate. Not all of them, but many of them. He did have support, though, from some real technocratic people. So Lord Nick Macpherson, Permanent Secretary of the Treasury for over a decade, had said that Ed Miliband would do a good job, right? So it wasn't that he was this radical candidate. My guess would be, there's 2 stories going on, isn't there? Which is this is maybe factional infighting within the Labour Party, and people who were sort of close to Labour together, obviously Morgan McSweeney was a big fan of Shabana Mahmood, have said she is the person you have to make Chancellor, and he has sort of conceded.
We just screwed the Labour Party. Our guy, Keir Starmer's just left. He was going to get 15% in a general election. Please listen to us. After winning a by-election in a constituency where 6 weeks earlier, Reform got twice as many votes as Labour. But you should listen to us. This is crazy.
So the other option, though, is that, and I think this is probably just as likely, right, is that Andy Burnham is not particularly left-wing. He's a bit centrist, he's a kind of what works guy, and also not really interested in policy detail. The guy he trusts is Lord Jim McNeill, who used to be at Goldman Sachs, a big believer in devolution, but sort of very much of the political sort of center. He comes from business. And Andy Burnham thinks he's the one with the right ideas. And Jim McNeil says, I could work with Shabana. I might struggle with Ed.
But does that scream competence or seriousness when you're saying this person is very effective as the Home Secretary, great Office of State? I'm now going to move them from there. You've got to get a whole new Home Secretary who's going to have to acquaint and familiarise themselves with the department, with the senior civil servants, with the apparatus. Really important brief, by the way. Migration is so important to so many voters right now, and law and order. But I'm going to move that person here so that this person that 90% of the electorate's never heard of can be secretly in charge.
Well, it also speaks to the sort of the low level of confidence he has in the PLP, because if all the briefings are correct, Shabana Mahmood didn't really want to be Chancellor. All the briefings, and I mean, who knows whether that's sort of reflective of reality, but everything that's been written over the past 2 or so weeks has said Shabana Mahmood wants to continue her work in the Home Office. Whenever her and Andy Burnham have sort of had chats about government, they've mainly talked about migration and issues in the Home Office, and then a little bit about the economy. But she's been, and again, I'm not saying this is reality, but this is how it's been reported, that she's been strong-armed, really, into going into the Treasury, because Andy Burnham or the people around him have decided they don't want Ed Miliband, and they've decided that this barrister is in the BLB, which is now 300-odd people. Is it 400-odd people? I mean,
400
bloody
people,
load of them.
Sadly.
The only person who can possibly do this job is a barrister who's enjoying her job as Home Secretary. So it does seem strange.
Had a shadow position more than a decade ago. At least, Jim O'Neill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's Goldman, but like you say, he's got a private, again, I'm not suggesting these credentials matter, but it's coherent, right? Goldman Sachs came up with the BRICS acronym. He's been in finance. He's going to have a ton of connections, like whatever. I don't know. Shabana Mahmood's going to go to the G7, meetings. She's going to go to the OECD meetings, the IMF. She's going to go to, Hong Kong and Singapore and Shanghai. People are going, who is this person? Never seen this person. If it was a bit like what the Tories did with David Cameron, bringing him back as Foreign Secretary, I thought that was ridiculous. I don't like David Cameron. I think his government was a disaster. But at least it's a familiar face, and they have the competence to become a Foreign Secretary, and they can leverage networks really quickly. Shabana Mahmood is literally, and this isn't a criticism of her, she's literally bringing nothing here. No networks, no policy nows, no familiarity with the briefing. She doesn't want to do it. It's crazy. This is the second most important job in politics. And we don't know this for sure, but one major reason may be simply because Morgan McSweeney wants to feel important still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical it would be a Morgan McSweeney one, this. I mean, potentially.
Well, the Labour right.
The Labour, well, I think it maybe is a Jim O'Neill thing, right? So, and I suppose the interesting thing here potentially is, so there was lots of people who were putting their hopes and dreams on what Manchesterism would be. And there were people like Matt Lawrence, who's sort of friend of the show from Commonwealth, who's saying Manchesterism is about lowering costs by sort of through state ownership or state control. And they pointed to the B network in Manchester. And I always thought that was doing quite a lot of work, just saying, because of the B network, that's what Manchesterism is. Ed Miliband was the representative of that faction. There were other people who were saying Manchesterism actually is much more about some devolution, being incredibly open-minded and pragmatic when it comes to inviting in investment from anywhere, and having sort of like a growth model, which, it's not exactly trickle down, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to promote growth in the center of a city and then redistribute it a bit afterwards. Like, not particularly radical, but that's what Manchesterism in reality was. And Jim O'Neill, to me, speaks more to the reality of Manchesterism than Ed Miliband. So I think in a way, that's, Manchesterism in reality has won out over Manchesterism as it was hoped and dreamed to be by people in left-wing.
I think that's true. And look, the left, my goodness, and progressives are just, they are Olympic gold medalists when it comes to wish casting. I mean, it's crazy. They think politics is wish casting. And I think, we're a bit of an antidote to that here in Novara media, especially you.
I like a bit of wish casting.
They call him Skeptical Michael Walker because he's such a skeptic, but not a cynic. He's not a disappointed romantic. He never was. I think that's right about the reality of what Manchesterism is going to be. But isn't that crazy? Next time there's a budget statement given by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, if Shabana Mahmood is the Chancellor, she's going to say X, Y, Z. And people can say, well, she's not really saying it. It's really this other person that you've never heard of who was previously a senior partner at Goldman Sachs. Great. That's really going to help with the feeling of of a democratic deficit in this country's politics, isn't it? Fabulous.
I also want to say I'm not, critiquing people like Matt Lawrence for wish casting. In a way, the best way to have influence is to try and make your hopes and dreams reality, right? So I think it was very smart to say Manchesterism is this, because that is the best way to make Manchesterism that. It just seems to me that the other side has
It's
won
a left
out.
read, yeah, and also let's be fair. I'm not criticizing Matt Lawrence. It's a left reading of reality. It's not delusional, but like you say, there's also the political element, which is okay. Well, ultimately, devolution's Greater Manchester was given by George Osborne. This is fundamentally based on private capital, and it's building on 25, 30 years of Labour government at a local level, which wasn't led by, quote unquote, the left. So
it was people who were inviting in Emirati money to build big private tower blocks, saying that we're not going to have a affordable housing sort of target, because if we do, they're not going to build them in the first place. So it's better to get it built. They were very Labour centrist pragmatists.
I sort of look, here's the thing. I sort of get the sense that Andy Burnham still doesn't have really a political compass. And, in 2010, there wasn't really anything. I think post-2008, post-global financial crisis, he didn't really have anything orienting him. And I feel like there could be another crisis tomorrow and he could just do anything as Prime Minister. He could do anything. I wouldn't be surprised if we have an exogenous shock, like an oil crisis or a big geopolitical crisis or a financial crisis. He could nationalize some stuff, or he could go full Osborne austerity. I have no idea. That's quite a wild place to be in. Like, he's the Prime Minister, and we have no idea. I know we're talking about this a little bit later on in terms of who's challenging him about his political priorities and so on. I don't think we've ever had a Prime Minister who could be this unpredictable in a crisis.
Well, let's hear from the man himself. So Andy Burnham hasn't done many interviews since becoming the Prime Minister in waiting. He sort of has preferred not to speak to the press. But he has given an interview to Gary Lineker.
A lot of people are worried about inequality in the country. Cost of living is really difficult, as you've just mentioned. Economically, what can you do differently? A wealth tax, possibly, of the super rich, which is what a lot of people, economists, are calling for.
I'm going to obviously take my time to properly look at the state of things, particularly the state of the finances. And I just said a moment ago, Gary, about bringing people together. I don't want to come in and sort of, if you like, create new divisions and pitch people one against another. I'm not going to rule things out right now. I do believe we need a greater sense of fairness and people feeling that things are being done in the right way and a fair way. But at the same time, I don't want to sort of be perceived as somebody who's coming in with grudges and agendas and going to just immediately find or demonize one group or create a new way of dividing people.
I mean, that is a classic people pleaser, not particularly on top of policy. So he's asked if we do a wealth tax. He says, I don't want to divide people.
It's pathetic.
It wasn't very impressive.
It's pathetic. With Michael, we're running a £100 billion deficit, okay? Now, you might think that's really important. You might think it's less important, whatever. It's a variable in terms of our borrowing costs, okay? I think it needs to be a lot lower. I don't think you need to cut welfare spending to get there. Part of that is growth. You can borrow more right now to invest in certain things which boost growth and you can get the deficit down in the long term. But that's a lot of money. When you're borrowing that much more, when your growth is so low, when you have an aging population, when you have maybe 100,000 illegal unlicensed HMOs in this country, when you have railway workers being killed at work, when you have quite serious things happening, cocaine being sold in corner shops, the fact that in some areas, up to 50% of vape shops are being connected to organised crime by trading standards. These are big things. They need solutions. You can't say, I'm going to bring people together. Well, okay.
Andy, Corbyn coded, actually, that, isn't it?
It is, right? Andy, my man, there's 100,000 unlicensed HMOs, let's say. There was about 76,000 in 2020, according to an answer by Esther McVeigh, that time was Minister for Housing. Let's say it's 100,000. What are you going to do about it? I just want to bring people together. Listen, you're not campaigning in a by-election anymore. You're not talking to Steve Richards on a podcast. You're the Prime Minister. You are going to upset some people some of the time. Obviously, don't try to upset anybody. And the whole thing about a wealth tax, I support a wealth tax, 2% on all wealth north of £100 million a year. Talked about with Gabriel Zucman. You can be a right-winger and support that because you want more money spent on the police, because you want to get rid of inheritance tax, because you want a more competent regulatory state. Or you can be a left-wing supporter and do other things. Or maybe you want to do a bit of both. That's fine. But the idea that a tax is divisive, like we have capital gains tax, is that divisive? We have income tax, is that divisive? We have inheritance tax, is that divisive? It's just anti-politics. And again, this is really worrying, Michael. Burnham has some good aspects to him as a politician, which I like, which are commendable. But you can't be the prime minister and be that anti-political. Because Blair leaned into some anti-political things, but ultimately he was supremely ideological, right? There was a political hinterland which was very ideological, still is. I don't agree with much of it, but it was there. But Burnham doesn't seem to have any of that. And, this is the day that the Prime Minister is in the House of Commons saying he's going to leave the top job. And Andy Burnham is doing a podcast with The Rest is Football. Now, look, if they were talking about Everton and Trevor Stephen and Neville Southall in the 1980s, great, good.
They did for the first 10 minutes talk about football.
That was the first time I've seen him be challenged substantively on policy as the Prime Minister in waiting.
And it wasn't impressive.
And it's on The Rest is Football with Gary Lineker. I'm not criticising Gary Lineker. Good on him. He should do that. But goodness me, this is worrying. Again, we're a Security Council member, nuclear armed state rather, G7 economy. This isn't serious. I'm really worried, Michael.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair enough. We'll come back to it though. We could have talked about this for 40 minutes, but as I said, we're going to fit tonight's show into 1 hour. And we're moving on to the issue of Argentina. Apologies, by the way. A couple of people have messaged me. When I said F the Argentines on Monday, I was joking. I love you guys. We don't know who will be the UK's next Chancellor come Monday. An unanswerable question of almost equal importance is who will, by then, be World Cup champions. To be honest, I wrote that intro, didn't I, before we knew that it's probably going to be Shabana Mahmood. Anyway, I'll continue. And once again, we won't do footballing speculation about England's semi-final match against Argentina, especially as many of you might be watching the show after the game has ended. But the political row surrounding the game continues to heat up. This was Argentina's vice president on Tuesday. Vice president, not a random politician. Tomorrow we play the usurping Pirates. This isn't just another match. I'm not going to be politically correct or cold-hearted against the English. It's always something more. It's the Malvinas. It's Diego. It's Leo's last one. And it's putting the brakes on the invaders. Go Argentina, because until our last breath, we're going to claim what's ours. This is personal for Victoria Villarreal, who is their vice president. Her ex-bio lists her as the daughter of a Falklands War veteran. I suppose actually that was in Translate on X, wasn't it? Presumably in Spanish it says the Malvinas war veteran. Her tweet follows an article published by Argentina's foreign minister ahead of the England-Argentina tie. So on the weekend, Pablo Quiano published an op-ed called Malvinas, the Force of a Just Cause. In it, he said, Falklands Islanders, or again, I presume he said people on the Malvinas, are an artificially implanted population. He therefore dismissed the result of a 2013 referendum, which showed overwhelming support for remaining part of the UK, of the 3,000 or so residents. And he said, quote, "Time does not transform an illegitimate occupation into sovereignty, nor will it divide the territorial unity of the Argentine Republic." Aaron, obviously I'm not remotely passionate about the Falklands or the Malvinas. It's a bit funny though, isn't it, for a politician in Argentina to say that time does not transform an illegitimate occupation into sovereignty. Because, I mean, they weren't exactly invited there.
No. Bit weird.
Bit weird, yeah.
I know, there's a good read on this, actually, in terms of the Argentine obsession with the Falkland Islands. And, like, most Brits are just going, huh? Because if you look at it, again, Britain, very, very successful imperialist power, has been involved in so many wars. It's won some wars, it's lost some wars. You know, it lost the American War of Independence. It won the First World War, the Second World War, won the Napoleonic Wars. The Argentines, in sort of recent history, last century, have been involved in one war, and they lost really badly.
And it was that.
And it was that one.
Right, so that's why it's...
So it just looms so large in the national consciousness, if you think about it in terms of martyrs to the nation, etc., which, look, every country cares about that stuff. This country, Iran, wherever. So I think that's a really good explanation as to why it's just so central to the Argentine national psyche. And also this idea of, the Malvinas is, or the Falklands, before people cancel me, that's going to get clipped by some right-winger. The idea that is, an artificial transplant. I mean, don't go there. Very dangerous if you're Argentine. So, I mean, it's also true, by the way. If you try and, as a British person, right, if you try and emigrate to the Falklands, good luck. It's impossible. I looked into this because, of course, they've got a small population, I think 2,500, something like that. And I thought, well, hold on. We could just get 3,000 people, 3,000 Brits, to move to the Falklands. We could campaign for a referendum for independence. Of course, you've got all that energy. We could become, several $1 million per head GDP per
Could be the
capita.
richest people in the world.
Yeah. So easy. We just organize it over Facebook. Let's do it. And then I'm looking at the migration policy to go to the Falklands. It's impossible. It's impossible. So this idea that, it was about the sovereignty of the people who live there. And by the way, I agree with that. I agree with all of that. But let's not pretend this is a normal country, because it's not.
Although we were saying, we talked about this with Ash on Monday and offended some people in the audience, so apologies. But the British did try and give it back. Well, not back, because it was never Argentine. But they did try and give it away in the 70s because it was sort of affecting their trade relationships in Latin America. But the people on the island really didn't want to go.
Yeah.
So
also, can I just say about Argentina? The most racist fans we've seen at this World Cup. So for that reason...
Well, the Paraguayans were as well, weren't they?
Well, yeah. I once heard somebody compare Iranian monarchists. They said the Iranian monarchists are the Argentines of the Middle East. I think that's a beautiful formulation.
Yeah. Well, because lots of people say that the Argentine football team is kind of whiter than most European football teams at this World Cup.
This is what racists on X say, right?
Well, yeah, but they say this is what Europe should look like. Whereas if you're looking for an explanation as to why the fans might be a bit racist, it's because it's actually a less multicultural place than Europe, and the people there are of European heritage. On a less political note, let's move on. But perhaps a more fundamental one, because it suggests to me that we might just live in a simulation and that everything might happen for a reason. There are no coincidences. Aaron, do you know who is in this photo?
Yes.
Who's in it?
Lionel Messi.
Yes. And who is this 5-month-old baby?
I don't know, Michael. Tell me.
He is Lamine Yamal. So this is insane, right? This is completely bonkers. Because if, heaven forbid, Argentina beat England this evening, the two men in that photo will face off in the World Cup final. So that baby, and it was the 20-year-old Lionel Messi, will be playing against each other. Now, that photo exists because Lamine Yamal's family won a competition to have their baby featured in a charity calendar with Barcelona stars. But of course, no one could have guessed that 19 years later, Lamine Yamal would himself become Barcelona's star striker. Yamal will on Sunday become the third youngest player to ever play in a World Cup final. If Argentina beat England, heaven forbid, Messi will become the second oldest player to have played in a World Cup final. Now, I'm not a particularly sort of suspicious guy. I'm a materialist. I don't really think everything happens for a reason. But this is surely too insane for there not to be some kind of force.
You're saying it's a glitch in the Matrix?
Happen. I mean, it must be.
Do you think it's because we live in a computer simulation, or because there's some kind of divine providence? Because, Ezra Klein, who you love, he says that he subscribes to this whole idea of maybe we are living in a simulation. But then, of course, the criticism of that is this is what all societies have always done. And because our society is deeply embroiled in network technologies and computation, this is just the latest iteration of a myth to explain the inexplicable. So do you think we live in a simulation?
Well, I hadn't. But I mean, how many babies applied to be in that photo shoot? How many families applied, right? And a 5-month... it wasn't like he was in Barcelona's youth academy. He was just a random baby.
Yeah.
How many pictures have you seen of a 20-year-old footballer who goes on to be the world's best footballer bathing a small baby?
Yeah.
Very rare.
Who then goes on to be
the world's best young footballer.
I think he's the best teenage player since Messi.
Lamine Yamal is the new Messi.
You'd probably say Mbappe, but even then, teenager, I think Yamal at 16 was scary.
Yamal is the new Mbappe, right? So it's Messi then.
Yeah, but Mbappe was very, very good. But Yamal was top tier at 16. I think he was better at 16 than he is now. So you're right. The idea that the two greatest teenagers in the history of football. Pretty weird, right? Maybe it is all a simulation.
Pretty goddamn weird. My colleague Aaron Bastani recently went into the lion's den to debate communism, China, and Joseph Stalin with Camilla Tominey of the Daily Telegraph. Aaron, we're going to look at a few clips from that very interesting debate. You actually covered a lot of topics which are very dear to my heart. First of all, fill me in on the context. How did you end up sort of having an hour debate with Camilla Tominey on the Telegraph podcast? What were you invited on to discuss?
Well, our good friends at the Telegraph. I think I actually disagreed with Camilla about something on X, and I think I criticised the Telegraph. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't anything major. It was a policy disagreement. Probably something like, I don't know, wealth tax, something like that. We disagreed, and then she said, oh, maybe we should get you back on. And then one of the producers got in touch, and I went to Telegraph Towers. Lovely big building, lots of money, great resources, and yeah, we had the conversation.
Let's look at it. Come on. So parts of the debate were riffing off Aaron's book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism.
My understanding of the premise of your book and how one achieves luxury communism, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, because I might have got it wrong, is that you want to create this society where automation and technological advances mean that the working classes don't need to do the menial chores anymore, and that society will flourish because they are freed into a different direction where with state help they will be supported to have more enriched lives. Is that a fair summary?
Well, the idea that people are not going to be doing manual work, horrible backbreaking work, I mean, that might happen under capitalism just because of levels of automation with people like Elon Musk driving up and whatnot. And that brings its own problems because, of course, that's going to create greater inequality. Lots of people won't be able to access work, blue-collar jobs that have provided lots of work for people over the decades. Driving is the great example right now, I think. Something like 3.5 million people drive for a living in the United States. If you have self-driving cars, those jobs disappear. So the automation bit's happening. The question is who's going to benefit from it is the kind of the central part of the book. And you don't, have to be a radical socialist to think it shouldn't be billionaires and oligarchs. It could be a relatively widespread sort of affluence, like we saw after the Second World War.
But back to the Chinese example, aren't they building houses and roads and other things at an alarmingly quick rate because the workers there are on very low wages and possibly being abused?
I've never been to China.
But you've got experience of China having abused the human rights of its own citizens.
So again,
right?
if I speak to people from China, I've spoken to British people who've been to China, and they say, I would rather be born in Britain, the whole John Rawls, veil of ignorance. But actually, having seen how old the people live there, I think it's perhaps the best place in the world to be an old person. That's what they've said to me. But again, I don't want to talk with kind of, real sincerity because I've never been to China.
So we're going to go on to, we'll see a few more clips, but from listening to the whole thing, especially talking about folk, so fully automated luxury communism, what kind of struck me was that Camilla Tominey was almost coming from a similar place, not, apologies, James Butler, not sort of in the totality, but when you did your first folk interview with James Butler, I remember sort of his big critique was, you're all into abundance, because you think we can have this radical abundance. But isn't that based on the exploitation of resources and the exploitation of labor in countries like China?
Yeah.
And that was her critique.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. Right?
Yeah. Because exploitation doesn't happen in Britain, of course.
Yeah, that's what was quite strange about it. Because if you're going to critique kind of the Chinese model, the fact that they exploit labor that might be the sort of Trotskyite critique.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it works as the critique from the right, because obviously capitalism does that too.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, isn't it, when people from the right say, oh, it's state capitalism, it's not communism. You say, okay. Like you said, this is something that Trotsky would say. I don't think that, by the way. I don't think it is state capitalism.
We can come on to that. We've got a clip on that. Let's look at this next clip, because this is the one that sort of they clipped to put at the beginning of the interview. I don't know if it was supposed to be as a gotcha or just a sort of taster of what was to come.
Don't you think that the development of these electric cars and all of these solar panel and other, frankly, there's an irony here, by the way, because they're building these coal-fired power stations while at the same time exporting all of this gear to countries like us that lap it up, that want it hook, line and sinker without asking the real questions about who's being abused in the process. So why are you giving them the benefit of the doubt in China with their own people and the Uyghurs, and not giving them the benefit of the doubt in the Congo? Why would they behave differently in the Congo than they would of their own country?
Just from what I've read.
But you're forgiving them this because they're communists, and you can't
I'm not
bear the
forgiving-
idea of communists being bad people.
No, communists have been very bad people.
Okay, good. I'm glad we agree on
No,
that.
like, so-
well, there are some on the left that don't think Stalin was that bad. And actually, look at Jeremy Corbyn in his bloody little red book. Oh, Chairman Mao. Actually, he was a big, friendly, cuddly bloke who wasn't responsible for millions of deaths during the
Mao did
Cultural
some evil
Revolution.
stuff, but he was also, he was one of the great historical figures of the 20th century.
Imagine
he just
doing
was.
that. Imagine saying that about Hitler.
But in what regard?
Well, that's a bit like saying
Hitler took over. Okay, now you
Hitler
make your
was
argument,
an
I'll respond.
evil Nazi, but he was a good orator. Isn't
He was a good orator.
That was very entertaining.
It's true.
People in the comments have said, you put that at the beginning, but what Bastani said is obviously completely true there.
Of all the criticisms against Hitler, he was a bad public speaker. I've never heard that one before.
Actually, let's go straight on to our next clip, because I don't want to preempt sort of what we're going to get onto. Because again, before the comment about Hitler and oratory, again, she was talking about how sort of Chinese development is based on the exploitation of labor and the exploitation of resources, which again is kind of the Trotskyite criticism of Chinese development, not really the right-wing one. And this all relates to one of our favorite debates to have, the extent to which China is capitalist. So let's go to that clip, that part of the debate.
China today is a market economy, but it's not a capitalist economy. And we can learn a lot from it.
I don't know why you're arguing that it's not a capitalist economy.
So
it's based on free markets. It's based on the creation of wealth to create jobs.
So, if you look at a company like Huawei or Cattle, a big player in batteries, or BYD, because banks in China are socialized, they can give very low interest rate loans to many of these companies, large and small. And that allows these companies to sell products with razor-thin margins, but of course at huge scale.
Yeah.
Companies in the West can't do that for a ton of reasons, because of, we have shareholders, because the costs of accessing credit are much higher.
Well,
101
also
reasons.
we can't compete with low energy costs in Chinese factories, fueled by carbon.
Chinese energy costs aren't necessarily that. A great example of
Chinese energy costs are considerably lower
much
than
lower.
ours.
Taiwan, high energy costs actually, but they have this $1 trillion company with
well, they're making all of these
TSMC.
microchips. But hang on, I must take issue with this. Do you think the workers on the factory floor in China, or indeed in the sweatshops, think that there's anything luxurious about the communism?
Their
You're being
system
very
is
selective.
No, I'm really not. I think
Yeah,
if you look at India and you look at China, I know, and I'm sure if anybody, and you as well, if you're being totally honest, what country would you rather have been born in the last 30 years? I think China is an economic miracle when you look at the last 50 years.
Under no circumstances on earth would I wish I was born in China in the last 30 years.
Rather than India.
Can you address? Oh, I see. Not rather than the UK.
Well, no, but the UK had several hundred years head start.
Fine. But can you just answer the question about the actual workers on the factory floor, and indeed in the sweatshops of China, in the Xi'an factories and beyond? You think they're enjoying luxury communism?
I don't think the process they go through is any different to what happened with this country's working class over the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
No, I'm
it's
talking
the same.
about it.
Again, very interesting. Very much enjoyed it. I thought it was a very productive conversation. You both come across as quite charming, open-minded people. I suppose what I want to put to you here, because I think there was something strange about the conversation, even if it was sort of fun to listen to, because she was a right-winger who I thought was making a left-wing critique of China.
Yeah.
And you're a left-winger saying that actually sort of Chinese development, yes, there are these injustices, but Chinese development probably makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right. And I suppose my position here is a bit different to both of yours. So I am pro China in the sense that I think that Chinese development has been a net good. I think that, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And they are still lifting millions of people out of poverty, and the middle class is constantly growing. And having been there, it doesn't seem like you're living in 1984, right? It seems like there is a social contract which is generally working, and that to the extent that people are sort of exploited in their work, or at least, they have difficult times in their work, there seems to be a general societal understanding that we are getting rich, in the sense that there is social mobility, our children will do better than we do, and so we're willing to take the downsides of the system to benefit from the upsides. That's my impression. Now, obviously, I can't speak for 1.4 billion Chinese people, and actually I did meet people who disagreed, because I met people who had a more Trotskyist critique of of the Chinese Communist Party. Obviously, these weren't just random people I bumped into in the street. These were people who I was sort of linked up with. But what I find, I suppose, difficult to come to terms with or get on board with is people who are pro-Chinese development but anti-capitalist. Because I think that all the things that are sort of defensible and justifiable about the Chinese system, whether or not you call it capitalist, because I think it's almost semantic whether or not you say China is capitalist or it's communist or yada yada, market communism. But nearly all of the moral problems that people have with capitalism, the Chinese system also has. And the strongest argument for capitalism, as it's existed in the West for the last couple of hundred years, is to say that, yes, it does have these injustices, it does have these imbalances of power, but ultimately what it has brought about is the greatest levels of economic development and increases in living standard in human history. And therefore, as a package, it's worth it. And I would say that the justification for the Chinese system is exactly the same. So I'm in a way, I've become less ideological as I've grown older, and I'm very much just into like development. Sort of, I look at the outcomes. If the outcomes are development, then yes, probably the package can be acceptable. Yeah, we'll make reforms here and there to try and make it fairer, to try and make it more tolerable, to try and make it more civilized. But the existence of injustices doesn't mean we can reject the package. And I feel like the only way you can possibly defend the Chinese system is to say, yes, the overall development justifies the injustices because the package is worth it. And I want to put that to you, because you've written a book called Folk. So are you someone who's pro-China and anti-capitalist, or are you someone who is open to the Chinese model of development and the Western model of development?
I'm not an anti-capitalist. I'm a communist. I'm a Marxist. Marx never said I'm an anti-capitalist. He wrote a book called Capital. He viewed capitalism as a necessary precursor stage to communism, which is the highest stage of production. And communism is only possible with the fullest unleashing of the forces and liberation of production, which is the same reading on political economy that you get from Deng Xiaoping after the mid-1970s. So this anti-anything. Look, when you had capitalism, Adam Smith and David Ricardo didn't say, I'm anti-feudalism. No, they were talking about a new mode of production.
But so the argument you put forward there, that's not how I would see the difference between the UK and China. I wouldn't say sort of.
But I've got moral critiques of capitalism. I've got moral critiques of all kinds of social and economic systems. But the historical Marxist critique of capitalism is not a moral critique. It's about a set of contradictions internal to the system which cannot be resolved.
But so I still think that that's not what we're seeing with the West and China. So the Marxist model was to say you begin with capitalism, then there will be these contradictions, and then therefore out of that.
Well, there are a ton of readings actually.
But that seems to me
the idea that they all agree.
But that seems to me what you're suggesting there, right? It's not a moral critique.
So somebody like
it's stages. No. So capitalism comes, then there's communism. Whereas to me, it looks like there are two parallel paths. No. There's a path of Western development, which was actually much better at dealing with crises than Marx ever predicted. And there
Why? Because there was the political alternative of the USSR. And the minute that disappears, capitalist West falls apart in terms of trying to give any decent share of increases in productivity to the working class. So, no, it's true. Marx geopolitically, there were literally two poles in the world after 1945, and to get legitimacy, the capitalist West obviously has to give a decent share to the working class. Of course, Marx didn't foresee that. No, but who could?
His argument was that that capitalism couldn't resolve its own crises, and clearly it was able to. Maybe it needed some outside pressure, but it was able to. And I think you've got this parallel path. How has it? Yeah. Well, because he thought that there would just be the endless immiseration of the working class.
The immiseration crisis.
That hasn't happened, right? The middle class has grown and grown and grown, right? I mean, at the moment, we're in a bit of a stagnant place, but that's for the last 15 years. Up until that point, the middle class was growing and growing.
But hold on,
that's not growing and growing across the world.
No. The contradictions are, for instance, one contradiction is capitalism wants ever greater efficiency in terms of producing goods and services, so it produces more goods and services with less human labor over time. Obviously, and I think this is happening, that's going to lead to higher levels of automation. The problem is to reproduce your life under capitalism, you need access to a wage to buy the goods and services being made. So we have more goods and services made more efficiently than ever before, but fewer people accessing a wage to buy those goods and services. That's a contradiction that leads to underconsumption. And you don't need to be a Marxist to believe in that. Keynes talks about it. There are loads of underconsumptionist critiques of capitalism, which aren't even particularly radical.
But they're not. But they're social democratic. That's not a contradiction of capitalism.
That is a contradiction
that can be resolved.
Yeah, by radical social democratic policies. That's one contradiction. There are many.
Not Marx. Like Keynes wasn't a Marxist.
No, I'm saying it is a contradictory system that is not homeostatic and self-regulating. Actually, neoclassical economics thinks that it is. That's the whole point of bloody supply and demand of all their stupid econometric tables. It is homeostatic and self-regulating. That's the big difference, even between somebody like you and Tom Howard. Tom Howard's like, literally, just get out of the way. Let it do its work and everything will be fine. It's utopian nonsense.
But that's why I'm a Keynesian, really, not a Marxist.
But that's one contradiction. We can talk about other contradictions too, whether it's climate, whether it's social reproduction. So, for instance, the big contribution of Rosa Luxemburg, we've talked about this many times. If we're looking at capitalism, what is capital? Capital is value in motion, money making money. That's capital, right? That's a wheel turning to generate more value. And Marx is the first to say that capitalism as a mode of production is really good at creating more value. Some of it's fake and really bad, like, vape shops and betting, but it's often very good, right? But the point is, you can only reproduce that circle that's creating more value if you have two other circles. One is social reproduction. Okay, where is the labor coming from? It's coming from people. What are people? Once upon a time, they were babies. Who's reproducing the babies? It's families, often women. They're doing that for free. Another one is nature. Nature is an input into production. And often we're viewing nature as what he calls the free gifts of nature. There's a level of abundance that's presumed with nature. So, again, that's just a Marxist understanding of contradictions.
Or a Keynesian understanding, or a Polanyian understanding.
No, I don't think Keynes talks about that at all, actually.
We could debate this for ages, but I did say at the beginning of the show,
You're mischaracterizing me, Michael. You say you can't be pro-China and anti-capitalist, and I'm saying I'm not an anti-capitalist. I'm saying I agree with something like Deng Xiaoping, which says that China is developing the force of production to ascend to a new mode of production.
I don't think you can
Bukharin said the same.
You can be pro-China and too critical of the Western model of development, is basically what I'm saying.
Well,
because
you
both
could have
of
said
them
the
have
same.
the same compromise.
You could have said the same about
the same outcomes.
You could have said the same with the 5-year plans and Stalin. You could have said the same with Lenin when he was visiting, when he was adopting Taylorist principles of industrial production, and they were saying, let's build our factories like the Americans. You said, well, that's not real. By the way, people did. That's not real communism. You're doing this.
But even if it is, I'm not saying, is it or is it not real communism? I'm saying the best argument for the Chinese model and the best argument for the Soviet model, if you want to make one, is that it brought about development. Yes, it had these compromises. Yes,
you have to,
people were
development,
screwed
of course, has to be
over,
about development.
but development happened, and that can also be said for Western capitalism. Anyway, the reason
it's different. There are different kinds of development.
The reason I'm cutting short this debate isn't because I don't love it. We will come back to it over and over again, I'm sure, because it's our favourite one to have. But I did say I want to get on a line bike as soon as possible to get to a pub for England versus Argentina. So we're going to go to our final story. One of Keir Starmer's last acts as Prime Minister was to make an apology on behalf of the British state to women who were victim to forced adoptions. This was the practice predominant in Britain between 1949 and 1976 of coercing or pressuring young or unmarried women to give up their newborn babies for adoption. 185,000 babies were taken from unmarried mothers in England and Wales and placed for adoption through a system in which the state, churches, and adoption agencies coerced and shamed young women, many of them teenagers, into giving up their children. Mothers were hidden away in mother and baby homes, denied information about welfare support that would have let them keep babies, and in some cases never allowed to hold them. Now, I have to admit, this was a story that passed me by when it happened a fortnight ago. There's been a lot of breaking news of late, and sort of apologies by politicians for historic injustices can be all too easy to dismiss as theatre. What I hadn't realised, though, was that this is a scandal that directly affects a key member of the Novara Live team. Now, that's because the mother of one of our long-time producers, Darius, was herself an adoptee whose biological mother was coerced into giving her up for adoption. Debbie Iromlou, as well as being Darius's mum, is co-founder of the Adult Adoptee Movement, and her testimony about her experience as a forced adoptee was referenced by Keir Starmer in his speech to Parliament on the adoption scandal. I spoke to Debbie earlier today and began by asking her to outline how she came to be a forced adoptee.
My birth mother came from Kuwait, and she came over to London when she was pregnant with me. She went to visit her doctor at Harley Street and said that her life would be in danger, and she'd be at threat of an honour killing if her family found out that she was pregnant and she'd had a baby out of wedlock. So the doctor suggested adoption and put her in touch with a private adoption agency.
Sort of the standard case is where someone was pressured to give up their baby for adoption by the NHS or by the Church of England, maybe because they were young or because they were out of wedlock. And so there's been this long campaign for justice. Yours is a bit more complicated as a story. So sort of talk to me about where you feel you were failed and where your mum was failed by the British state?
Well, I was born in 1968, so slap bang in the middle kind of the whole forced adoption era. And the private agency that was then at the time called the Centre for Memorial Help for Babies, then became the Phyllis Holman Richards Adoption Society, was involved in a lot of adoptions from that era. And my mother just happened to be one of them, in the sense of the only option that they gave her was that I had to be placed into foster care and that she had to sign to agree to get me released. And I don't think I particularly had the right quality, or should I say duty of care, simply because I was seen as the baby of a foreign national.
And talk to me about what happened to you, because I know sort of you got in contact with your birth mother later in life, but let's begin with sort of your childhood. So your mother was pressured to sign documents,
Yes.
putting you into care essentially.
Yes.
So what happened next in your life?
So I was placed in foster care for the first 2 months with a temporary carer. And then I was placed in long-term foster care with a single mother in Suffolk who was living on a council estate, and she was barred from fostering or adopting children by social services. And social services at the time had said that I shouldn't be placed with her, but the agency ignored it, and social services then went on to ignore their own advice, and I was left there. The bizarre factor of my case is that even though I'm classed as a transracial adoptee, i.e. I'm a non-white person, I was raised by a white mother to believe that I was actually biracial. And that she was my biological mother. And it was only when I turned 16 and social services were worrying about me aging out in the system that they forced her into adopting me legally. And that's when the true knowledge of my birth parentage came through. And I found out that actually, I'm not her biological daughter, and that my birth parents came from Kuwait and Iran.
And just to clarify, I mean, you said that your adopted mother, or the mother who adopted you, or the woman who adopted you, sorry, just
Yes.
to get my terminology correct, she was barred from adopting or fostering.
Yes.
I mean, what was that
Yes.
about, and what was she like as your carer or your foster mother or your adopted mother?
Well, she, as an adopted mother, she had a lot of issues, mental health issues, and that was the main concern about her in general. She wasn't a fit carer. And so being the child of somebody who was like that was extremely difficult. So I kind of learned to become very self-sufficient throughout my childhood because I wasn't being given the care that was supposed to be afforded me.
And when you discovered that you were adopted, I know you went on, I mean, basically a very long and difficult quest to find your birth mother. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So from the age of 16 right through to the age of 24, I was searching for my birth mother. And I went to the adoption agency to ask for my file, and they refused to show me any information. They refused to show me a file, basically. And they told me that I shouldn't search for her, that I would put her life in danger. I should think about her and just get on with my life. And there was a reason why she gave me up. She didn't want me. She won't want me, and to forget about her. And I found that it was quite dismissive. They didn't seem to care about my feelings, about who I was and where I came from, and the need to know the truth about my origins. I then went back again at the age of 18, and they still refused to show me any documentation. So all I did have was basically a birth certificate with her name on it. So I had to use that. I went to the embassy. They refused to help me because of the scandal that it might cause. And so to cut a long story short, in those 8 years, it took, after the Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and I saw the images of the tanks crossing the border into Kuwait, I became terrified of the fact that my own mother would die before I had a chance to meet her. So it kind of gave me a real urgency. And it wasn't until I started meeting up with other adoptees and being at workshops and gaining some community with them that I discovered that one of them was going to Kuwait on a job after the war to rebuild the country. And she made inquiries about my mother. I was able to get a phone number through her. of cousins. And then through the cousins, I called around and eventually got the phone number of my own mother and spoke to her. And that's how we finally became reunited.
I mean, that sounds like it would have been an incredibly emotional experience. I mean, what happened then? What did your mum say? And I suppose especially what did she say about the circumstances in which she was pressured or coerced to give you up as a baby?
She was really deeply traumatized by the fact that she'd given me up. She said that she'd never forgotten about me. She thought about me every single day, especially on my birthday. She said that when she'd left me at the hospital, she always looked in, when she walked up and down Oxford Street as a tourist, that she would look into prams wondering if I'm one of those babies. So she was still traumatized. And I think that my appearance in her life at the age of 24 re-traumatized her. But she felt deeply ashamed and guilty for what she'd done to me, and it never left her. And that was very difficult because I was also very traumatized and very angry at the same time. And I thought that I could possibly, I mean, we see these images, don't we, on Long Lost Family of, oh my goodness, we're reunited and everything's hunky-dory and we skip off into the sunset. And it's not like that in reality, because you're strangers, you're relative strangers, and it's a process and you have to work hard at getting to know each other and to try and work through the trauma together.
And so did you continue to have a relationship with your birth mother after finding her?
I did continue to have a relationship with her for 5 years until she died quite suddenly. So, yeah, I felt abandoned all over again.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I suppose let's talk about the events of the past couple of weeks. Keir Starmer made an apology. I know people have been campaigning for a very long time for there to be an official apology from the state for the failures it had made in this crisis, either because the coercion was by institutions in their control, so the NHS or the social services, or because the regulation failed to set the right guidelines for these private adoption agencies, which has affected you so severely. How much did that apology mean to you?
As a community of adoptees, it meant a great deal because we were acknowledged. We felt vindicated because for so long, talk of apologies has been directed towards the birth mothers only, and no one's really officially recognised the trauma involved in being an adoptee and the lifelong losses that we live with. But for me personally, it was very emotional because to be named by the Prime Minister and apologised to directly had great meaning for me. It helped to lift the shame that I've lived with all of my life because I've had so many doors closed in my face and nobody's ever apologized to me, not even the people who should do, my adoptive mother and my birth mother included. So to hear it on such a high level has meant so much to me personally as well.
And you're a co-founder of an organisation called Adult Adoptee Movement. Could you talk to me about that? And I suppose what do you campaign for? What does the Adult Adoptee Movement do?
So the Adult Adoptee Movement was formed as a result of the JCHR inquiry back in 2022, a look into the historical practices of forced adoption. And we've been campaigning really for acknowledgement of our own trauma and an apology for the state's harm of what they've done to us, what it has done to us. We have lost any connection to our biological family. We have to fight for the right to gain access to our own adoption information, which is held in files and locked away. We have to go through dehumanizing situations where we're having to beg for information and have to wait up to 2 years to see a social worker who then decides what information we're allowed to see and what needs to be redacted from our files. It means a lot in the sense of we've been campaigning for the right of access to our own biological medical history, because when you become adopted, your NHS number is changed, so you're completely cut off. For me personally, as an inter-country adoptee, I wasn't so affected by that because there wouldn't be any medical information on record of my birth family, but there will be for the thousands of adoptees that are British citizens and live here, and they're not allowed to access that. So we're walking around in genetic bewilderment. So we've worked hard to be acknowledged, and we realise that apology alone is not enough. So that, there needs to be mitigations attached, and that's what we continue to fight for the services that we deserve.
And sort of the deeply unjust experience that you've been through, that you've lived through, are you confident that, I mean, obviously the exact same thing wouldn't happen again, and the Church of England, the state, they've all sort of apologised for the practice of coercing mothers into giving up their children. But do you feel comfortable that the system now is as it should be, or are there still sort of problems in the adoption system that we should know about?
Yes, there are. I'm not comfortable with present day adoption because actually forced adoption is not just historic, it's happening today. Children, babies are being removed from mothers at birth in hospital wards. Babies are being removed from mothers who are suffering domestic abuse, domestic violence. Rather than help the woman, shelter the woman, take the woman and her child into safety, they remove a child from that woman. And she's already going through the trauma of being abused by a partner, and then you're adding to that by removing her child from her. And, you know, we're seeing it happen today with not just domestic abuse, we're seeing it happening with birth mothers who have mental health issues, or birth mothers who simply can't afford because of the class or the system that they're living in doesn't allow them to provide for their child. So they're obviously watched by social services. So forced adoption is very much happening today, and I really like to shine a light onto it. And I hope to be able to do that in the coming years.
And what about care for the adopted children? So I know that sort of the injustice in your life partly relates to the fact that your mother was pressured and coerced to give you, your birth mother was coerced and pressured to give you up. But then also, when you entered the care system, you were not dealt the care that you deserved to quite extreme degrees. I mean, being placed with someone who should have been banned, or, you know, had been banned from adopting people. That's really outrageous. What's your perspective on how children in the care system are currently treated by the state and its institutions?
They're being failed, quite frankly. They're being failed. Children are being separated when they're placed into care. Sibling groups are being separated. They're not, you know, people are not really caring as much. The caring profession is meant to be that, but sometimes what we find with the caring profession is they're the most uncaring of people, and children are leaving the system without any support, without any knowledge of how to live an everyday life. And quite frankly, it's outrageous to me that so many people who leave the care system as a result of the lack of care that they've experienced take their own lives even.
Debbie Iromlou, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights into the system as it was and as it is now. Also, thank you for raising Darius, who's been an absolute sort of stellar addition to the Novara Media team. So I appreciate you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was Debbie Iromlou, an amazing woman, speaking to me earlier today. Thank you for all of you for tuning in. Thank you to Aaron Bastani for joining me throughout the show. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. If you're watching England, Argentina in just over an hour's time, have a good night.